This safeguarding adult review is in relation to a male called Stuart. Stuart was chosen as a pseudonym and is used throughout the report. I'm Liz Hanlon, and I am the independent chair and report writer for this review. Stuart is a white British male who was 29 years of age at the time he sustained his injuries. In March 2022, Stuart attempted to take his own life. The seriousness of the incident left Stuart in hospital with life-changing injuries. Concerns were expressed in relation to the apparent lack of agencies working together effectively, particularly around the coordination of arrangements for discharge from services. A decision was made that the criteria for safeguarding adult review had been met. Stuart is described by his mother as being a very loving and caring person who sadly has suffered from mental health problems from a very young age. Stuart's mother stated that he'd started hearing voices from the age of 12 years. The family believed that Stuart had ADHD and requested him to be tested. She described, but by the age of 14 years, Stuart had been expelled from 2 schools and that they were struggling to control his behaviour. They were also concerned about the risks that Stuart was posing to himself and others. Stuart continued to struggle with both drug addiction and mental health problems over numerous years. Stuart's mother believed that she had to constantly fight to get the right help and support that she believed that Stuart needed and still needs. In October 2021, Stuart was admitted to hospital under Section 2 of the Mental Health Act and opened to the local mental health team. He was discharged into the care of the crisis team, however, required readmission under Section 135 of the Mental Health Act the same day and was detained. In November 2021, a referral was received into adult social care from the psychiatric ward requesting a social care assessment for Stuart. A screening assessment took place on the ward and no eligible social care needs were identified, and Stuart declined social care support. The early discharge planning team were involved in this screening assessment. It appears that Stuart's housing needs were taken into account at this screening. A safeguarding concern was raised by the approved mental health practitioner who had undertaken the Mental Health Act assessment with Stuart. Stuart was talking about allegations of rape, kidnap, and causing his own death. The safeguarding concern was closed, but there was no evidence of the events happening and the fact that Stuart was very mentally unwell. Stuart was discharged from hospital into the care of the KMPT Crisis Resolution and Home Treatment Team on the 17th of January 2022. In February 2022, a new referral was received into the Mental Health Social Care Team following Stuart being discharged from hospital. The referral stated that Stuart was living in a bedsit. It was identified that support was required to enable Stuart to engage in community-based services. The only accommodation identified for Stuart was in another town, which Stuart's mother felt was too far away, which may lead to Stuart using illicit drugs again. A joint meeting took place between Adult Social Care and KMPT. Stuart was to be allocated a social worker so that a care needs assessment could be completed. It was at this assessment that it was identified that Stuart was in need of supported living. However, this did not take place before the incident occurred. The local council confirmed that they had offered accommodations to Stuart, which had been declined as it was too far away for continued support. Later, Stuart's mother contacted Adult Social Care in relation to an offer of supported accommodation in another town. The placement had indicated that due to the high level of support required by Stuart, he would need 5 hours of care a day to be agreed before he could move into the placement. This figure was identified by the placement through Stuart's mother and not through agency's information. From the beginning of March 2022, several contacts were made with KMPT from Stuart's family members, indicating that Stuart was reporting thoughts of self-harm, was hearing voices telling him to die, and was having paranoid thoughts. On the 10th of March 2022, adult social care was still awaiting a social needs assessment. It was identified that Stuart was still waiting to be allocated a social worker to complete the assessment. Stuart was seen by a CAM PT. He presented as well kempt, engaged well, but was tearful at times. He reported thoughts of self-harm, but denied any intent or planning. Stuart's mother emailed Adult Social Care Mental Health, stating that Stuart had said that the voices were telling him to go to the train station and kill himself. KMPT's care coordinator attempted to call Stuart, but they were unsuccessful. On the 14th of March 2022, an ambulance attended a railway station following the report of a male, Stuart, having been hit by a train. It was identified that to look at someone's eligibility under the Care Act, professionals need to complete a care needs assessment, but prior to this, a screening assessment takes place. Care needs assessments were identified as being wider than being just for personal care, and it was discussed that some staff do not fully understand what eligibility is under the Care Act. The initial screening assessment took place on the 1st of November 2021, which determined that there were no care needs identified. The early discharge planning team and the ward doctor were involved in this assessment. The early discharge planning team made a referral to patient flow to provide support for Stuart's housing needs and to support any applications. A further screening need assessment took place with Stuart and his mother on the 17th of February 2022, and it was at this assessment that a decision was made to allocate Stuart a social worker to carry out a care needs assessment. From a professional's perspective, if a person has been in hospital under certain sections of the Mental Health Act, then that person is entitled to Section 117 funding for aftercare treatment and support in the community following hospital admission. Stuart met the criteria for Section 117 and was eligible. All agencies needed to be involved in Section 117 planning at the point of admission to hospital, so a joined-up response could have taken place. It was highlighted that Section 117 does not mean that an individual always receives commissioned services from Kent County Council, but will always involve Kent County Council jointly reviewing an individual's needs with health colleagues. Section 117 should have been completed in hospital jointly between Adult Social Care and KMPT prior to Stuart's discharge. Agencies need to consider how they listen to and incorporate in planning the voice of the family members. This becomes more complicated when the person involved is an adult and has fluctuating mental capacity. There are advocacy services available if there is no individual parent or carer. The Care Act identifies the need for advocates for care needs assessments and the use of independent mental capacity advocates for those adults who may lack the appropriate mental capacity to make certain decisions. It was queried if there should have been multi-agency meetings, and if so, would these have been helpful? It was explained that as part of the care programme approach, 6 monthly meetings are held with the individual to assess their mental health needs and review their care and support plans, and that these also take place if the individual is in hospital. However, there was no evidence that the local council had been invited to attend the multi-agency meeting, which would have been good practice, especially as housing was identified as a cause for concern by Stuart and his family. Stuart was a complex individual with mental health needs, drug addiction, and not consistently taking his ADHD medication, and concerns regarding homelessness. The ICG complex case teams attached to GP practices were identified as good practice, along with the new public health co-occurring conditions protocol. The positive relationship between Stuart and his GP was recognised. It was also noted that the private psychologist who Stuart saw in October identified a deterioration in Stuart's mental health. He shared his concerns with the GP promptly, and the GP was very responsive, but the actions planned were overtaken by the Section 136. It was highlighted that many people fit the same criteria as Stuart with complex needs, and it was asked what options for housing there were. Housing authorities have to make reasonable attempts to find housing. This duty was met for Stuart, but he was unable to be placed. It is recognised that there is a gap in provision with this cohort of people. In terms of mitigating risk, it was identified that having an aftercare support plan would help when contacting providers for placements. The importance of housing and being involved in hospital discharge planning was reiterated, as the earlier they are involved, the better chance they have to be able to offer the most appropriate support to that individual. Professionals need to consider a whole family approach when interacting with adults with complex needs, including mental health concerns. To highlight the importance of carers assessments, specifically where adults have mental health or drug and/or alcohol dependency problems. Agencies must continue raising awareness of the Care Act Wellbeing Principle, so that practitioners are working with people to identify and explicitly consider the most relevant aspects of their well-being. Access how their needs impact on them, assess their needs, and understand their goals and outcomes. Questions to ask yourself. How strong is your knowledge surrounding care needs assessments and screening assessments? Would you consider housing and financial needs within your assessments? Will you link these with other care needs assessments to identify the best support required by the adult? Would you know what to do and which legislation to use if someone does not want to engage with these assessments? Are you aware of the co-occurring public health policy and how to access training? Awareness raising needs to take place in relation to Section 117 to enable practitioners to identify the correct entitlement of an adult upon discharge from a mental health hospital for the purpose of preventing further readmissions to hospitals. Section 117 requirements should be identified at the initial admittance to hospital, and a multi-agency assessment to take place between health, adult social care, and to include the CAN4 and care needs assessment. The adult and family members of the adult's advocacy needs to be part of that process. Early discharge planning to take place at the start of admission of an adult under the Mental Health Act to identify the adult's needs and support required upon discharge to enable detailed planning to take place. To highlight the importance of including partner agencies, specifically housing, where housing needs are identified. Questions to ask yourself. Are you aware of Section 117 and the responsibility this places on your organisations? Are you aware of the CAN4 protocol and the need for care needs assessments? Would you know who to include in these assessments and the importance of accurate recording and accountability? Do you include family members and other professionals in your planning process, including discharge plans? Are you aware of the importance of informing and including housing in these processes, especially around discharge planning? And are you aware of the Kent and Medway Safeguarding Adult Board's escalation policy and how to use it? Awareness raising needs to take place with agencies surround the impact of potential domestic abuse and possible outcomes within a family where family members are displaying aggression and violence towards others. Appropriate risk assessments and carers assessments are to be completed. Questions to ask yourself. Are you happy with your knowledge surrounding the Mental Capacity Act and fluctuating capacity? Do you consider a whole family approach when you are interacting with adults who have complex needs? Do you know what to do if an adult with complex needs identify that they do not want family involvement? Are you aware of the care advocates and IMCAs and know what to go to and where to go to gain their support? And do you know the importance of both these services? The full report in relation to this safeguarding review has been published on the Kent and Medway Safeguarding Adults Board's website, which contains the multi-agency learning and more recommendations. Thank you.